Welcome back to Pride. Today's video is going to be for the Won't Start section. On Pride, we're going to be taking apart and cleaning out a leaf blower carburetor. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start on the top of the carburetor. Right here is the bulb. We got two Phillips head screws right on either sides of the bulb. Going to be real careful not to strip these screws. We've got a little bit of gasoline in our carburetor, so you always want to be mindful of where you're doing your work on your carburetor. I tried to pump out as much as I could, so it shouldn't be too much in there, but I'm expecting some to drip out as we take this carburetor apart. We've got our gasket for the top half of the carburetor. Two pieces. And the top half of our carburetor is pretty clean. We're going to remove this gasket here, making sure that everything has clear passage for gas to flow through. So now we just removed that thin gasket that was right on top, and we just placed it with that top half. That gasket is clean. We want to make sure we have clearance in this carburetor, and one thing you can see right here is this screen. We're going to want to clean that screen out as best we can. So I'm going to let it sit with a little bit of carburetor cleaner right in the bowl of that screen. So I'm just going to put some carb cleaner right on that screen and let that sit for a minute. Now you want to make sure you hit all the holes in the center of the carburetor with that carburetor cleaner, making sure that everything is clear. So two important spots to hit with carburetor cleaner, and also the gas intake right here. This is where the gas is going to go into the carburetor. Now we're going to flip our carburetor over and we're going to go to the bottom. Same thing with these bottom screws. Want to be real careful, give good pressure this way not to strip these screws. We're going to remove all four of these. Going to keep them separate from those top two screws. We'll take a look at how the bottom of our carburetor is looking. Top of the carburetor wasn't too bad. Gonna lift that bottom cover off. And then we have a gasket right here. We're going to remove this gasket very gently because we're not assembling a rebuild. So we don't have a spare gasket here. So very gently lifting this first portion of our gasket, exposing the inside of that bottom carburetor. Now I'm going to get to one of the most important parts of cleaning your carburetor. A lot of people will get to this point, they'll spray their carburetor down. They'll make sure they have clearance by spraying through the hole, and the carburetor cleaner comes back out. So we know we have clearance there, but one of the most important parts is right under the needle valve. And a lot of people are afraid to take this apart because it's a moving part, but it's actually very simple. So I'm going to go over that process right now. Here's the needle valve. Here's the Phillips head screw that holds it in place. You're going to want to press down because it does have a spring underneath it. This way, when you take that screw out, you don't lose any parts. I'm going to take that screw out, and we're going to let everything release out of there. You see that spring push the needle valve assembly right out. Okay, now we have our needle valve off to the side. We can take a look inside, right where that needle valve was sitting. Take this screw off, my magnetic screwdriver. Right where that needle valve was sitting, that's the most important spot right there that you want to hit with carburetor cleaner. Anytime you're hitting the carburetor with cleaner, you always want to be careful. You should wear protective eyewear and always be mindful of that carburetor cleaner coming back at you. So we're just going to give some good sprays right into that hole. Make sure it's clear through to the other side. You can also use compressed air as well. And now once we're happy with how we've cleaned our carburetor, we're going to put that gas valve back in. We're going to drop it right back into that hole. Once we drop it back into that hole, we're going to put our spring in place. We're going to compress our spring down with this little rocker. When we do that, we have to hook the rocker right back onto our valve. Just like that, holding down the spring with the thumb. We're going to put our screw back into place. Just going to drop it in. Use your screwdriver. Tighten it down. Once you tighten this screw down, you always want the screw to go in nice and smoothly, not putting a lot of pressure. That's how I know it's not cross-threaded. We're going to tighten it down. And that's it. We're back in place. When we press on that rocker, it pulls up on that gas valve. Now everything is back in place. It's nice and clean. Now we're going to reassemble our diaphragm. Our diaphragm was in good shape. We didn't need to clean this. And it's also still very flexible, which is also a good sign. You want it to be very flexible. You never want it to be stiff. If it's stiff, that's a good sign that it's been corroded and it's on its last limb, time to replace, in which case you would need a rebuild kit. So once you have that diaphragm back in place, we're going to put our cover back on. Once you get that cover back on, holding everything into place, you can feed those 4 screws back in, tighten them down, making sure not to over tighten these screws. You want them to go in nice and smoothly. You can use your screwdriver when getting these screws started, but you want to keep in mind hand tight, as if you were placing these screws in and getting them started just by hand. Never want to feel too much pressure on that screwdriver. And to get a nice good seal, we're going to go in a crisscross pattern. This way we're not tightening down one side before moving on to the next side. And I'm not tightening these down all the way just yet. I'm just going hand tight, placing these screws in with the screwdriver. Making sure not to ruin the threads or to strip these screws. So going in that crisscross pattern, and now we can tighten them down. It's just going to be about a quarter turn from once you have it hand tight. So here I'm going hand tight. I'm just putting very little pressure on the screwdriver, and now I'm going to go quarter turn. Hand tight and a quarter turn. That's the bottom of our carburetor. Now we're going to go ahead and put our top half back on. The gaskets are holding on nice and tight. We're going to move that throttle out of the way just a little bit, and we'll get a nice little click. That's how we know that top piece is on real well. We're going to hit this top piece with some carburetor cleaner before putting that bulb on. Before putting my bulb back on, I like to separate it from its gasket a little bit. This way I make sure my bulb really sinks in and forms that seal. When I do this, I'll put some pressure with the bulb and it'll click right into place, forming that seal before pressing down its gasket and putting in the screws. Now I know my bulb is in place. I've got the gasket on top. I'm just going to press that gasket down, start tightening down those screws, securing the top portion of our carburetor, pressing that bulb down, examining it from both sides, making sure that it's nice and level. Get a good seal. And this carburetor is ready to go. It's nice and clean. We didn't find any areas that were clogged. We had carburetor cleaner traveling through freely, shooting in one side, coming out the other side. The lines are both clean. This carburetor should be good to go. Thank you guys for watching. You can find more videos like this in the Won't Start section on the playlist Won't Start. Thank you again for watching. Be sure to subscribe to Pride Martial Arts.